Can a 0% credit card really help you get out of debt faster? What are the 2 traps you must know about with 0% balance transfer cards? And what's an easy way to organize everything from your next vacation to tax receipts? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 44th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Today, we're going to be talking about balance transfer credit cards, and the topic came to me, actually, a reader had sent in an email some time ago. This was back, I think, in January during the 31-Day Money Challenge. Her name is Kathleen. We actually emailed back and forth a number of times on a number of different finance issues. But here was her initial email. I'm going to read it to you. Here's what she said. She said, "Hi, Rob. I just rolled over one of my credit cards to another at 0%, which has been very successful for me at paying off credit card debt. But I realized in retrospect that I did not do enough homework, and they won. I thought you might like to put something out there so others do the math before they speak. I moved a 4.9% to a Discover offer where you could choose between 0% for 18 months with a 3% transfer fee, or a 3.99% for 24 months with a 0% transfer fee. Well, of course, I chose the 0% and felt good until I realized the transfer fee was over $200, and in 18 months I would have saved less than $300 at the present. At that rate, I am paying off debt. I will probably pay it off in less than 18 months, but since they charge the transfer fee up front at 0% rather than just letting interest take its toll at 3.99, the only way to pay less would have been to pay off early at the 3.99 rate. Duh, hindsight is 20/20, right?" Well, that was her email, and if you're as you're listening to this, if your head starts to spin as you try to take in all of those numbers, transfer fees, and how long the 0% offer lasts, and how much you're going to pay up front for it, and all these things, well, we're going to walk through that. In my experience, as my wife and I got out of debt, we used 0% transfer cards very effectively. It sounds like Kathleen has as well for the most part, although towards the end of her journey, it sounds like maybe she didn't get the best deal that she could have, and so we want to help you avoid that same thing. So today we're going to cover 10 tips for using 0% balance transfer cards to help you get out of debt. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk about the tool of the day, and it's one that I was using today to organize a trip that my wife and I are taking, and it's called Evernote. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. Maybe some of you haven't. But if you just go to evernote.com, it is a fabulous tool to really organize anything, whether it's something that you read on the internet and you want to save it. You can forward email to Evernote, and it will save it in your own account. You can scan documents into Evernote. I use it for everything from planning vacations to organizing our tax receipts. And for our vacations, you book airfare, you book a hotel, you maybe get a car rental, and you have all these confirmations coming in. I just save them to Evernote under a notebook that I call Travel, and I can then pull that up on my iPhone. And so when I'm at the airport or at the hotel or at the car rental agency, I have all of the confirmation numbers that I need. You're always thinking, what's that flight number? And exactly how much time do we have during that layover? Well, I can just check that on my iPhone very quickly through Evernote, and all the information is right there. You can scan your tax receipts and save them in Evernote, and tag them for the tax year, and then you'll have them at the end of the year when it's time to do taxes, like it is now. So Evernote's a great tool. Check it out. So with that, let's move on to the 10 tips for using a balance transfer card. This comes really from my own experience in using them, as well as a number of years blogging, as this topic has come up from time to time. And the tip number 1 is to make sure you understand the difference between 0% on purchases versus 0% on balance transfers, because there are 2 types of 0% introductory rates that credit cards offer. The first is, as you make purchases on your card for some period of time, they won't charge you interest, 0 interest. You'll have a minimum payment, of course, that you'll have to make each month, but that will not include any interest charges. And that's generally called as just 0% on purchases. And it can last, I've seen it anywhere from about 6 months to the longest today is 18 months. And towards the end of the episode, I'll talk about where you can find those 18-month cards where you get 0% for that for a year and a half. But that's how purchases work. And as we'll talk about in a minute, they don't have fees associated with them. We'll talk about balance transfer fees a little bit later. But with 0% purchases, there are no transfer fees or extra fees you have to pay to get the 0% rate. You simply use the card. And when you get your bill that month, you don't have to pay it off in full to avoid interest charges, so long as that introductory rate is still in effect. That's a big catch. We'll talk about that as well. But that's how 0% on purchases work. 0% on balance transfers is different. That's where you transfer one debt, typically another high-interest credit card, but not necessarily. It could be other kinds of debt as well, onto a new card that you've just obtained that offers the 0% on balance transfer. So the term just comes from transferring your balance or your debt from one credit card or from some other creditor onto this 0% balance transfer credit card. And those are the 0% on purchases versus 0% on balance transfers, as you can tell, are very different. One has a fee, typically, which we'll talk about on balance transfers. The other doesn't. And one is really designed to transfer existing high-interest debt onto the new credit card versus simply making purchases that over time don't accrue interest, again, while the introductory period is still in effect. And I mention this as tip number one because there are times when a 0% on purchases might be what you need. I mean, you may have some debt, for example, small amount of credit card debt, and you've got a big item that's you're going to be purchasing, and you've got the cash for it. Well, you could simply use the cash to pay off your existing credit card debt and then use a 0% on purchases credit card for that big purchase. And hopefully you get the credit card paid off in full before the 0% expires. But I've done that from time to time where you use the 0% on purchases and avoid the fee. But for a lot of people, that's just not possible. And so the best deal is to get a 0% on balance transfer card. And that's what we're going to focus on in this podcast. I will say that a lot of credit cards that offer one also offer the other, so you can get both. So if cards from like Citi or Discover or Capital One, they'll often offer 0% on both purchases and balance transfers. You'll just need to read the fine print to make sure you know what they offer. So that's tip number one. Make sure you understand the difference between 0% on purchases and 0% on balance transfers. Tip number two is this: avoid new debt. I mean, the idea of a 0% balance transfer card is to help you get out of debt faster by not having to pay interest. So all of the money you're paying towards the card will go towards the principal balance. You avoid the high double-digit interest rates that are common on credit cards. But that's not going to help you if you then start charging up more debt. You transfer debt off of one credit card onto a new credit card. That's fine. You have 0%. But it doesn't do you any good if you go back to that old card and start charging it up again, right? So key to this is avoiding new debt. Absolutely critical. Or this process is going to end up putting you deeper in the hole. Kind of like yo-yo dieting. It's the same concept. You start to pay it off, things look good, and then all of a sudden you start racking up more debt on the old card. That won't do you any good. So that's tip number two. Tip number three is this: have a plan. Understand how long the 0% offer is going to last. And try to figure out as best you can, one, will you be able to pay off the debt before the 0% offer lapses? And if you won't be able to pay off the debt, or if you're in doubt, what are you going to do? What is your plan? Now, I can tell you in our case, what we did was simply rolled over the debt from one 0% balance transfer card to the next until we had it paid off. And we did that for a period of about 3 or 4 years. And it worked just fine. And that could be a good plan if that option is available to you. That usually requires a pretty good credit score, as we'll talk about in a minute. But that can be one plan. But whatever your plan is, you want to make sure you have it and you think through the long term of this decision, even if you get a 0% offer that lasts a year or longer. And that may seem like a long time away, but it's going to come pretty quickly. And you want to know how you're going to handle this debt once the 0% offer comes to an end. So having a plan is really, really important. Tip number 4 is make sure you know what the regular APR or interest rate is on the card so that when the 0% offer does expire, you know what interest rate you'll be paying if you still have debt on that credit card. And that's something to take into account, particularly, again, if you don't think you'll be able to pay the debt off before the 0% offer expires. You'll want to be aware of what the regular APR interest rate is on the card so that if you have a balance after the 0% rate expires, you'll know what you'll be up against. Now, again, you may be able to transfer that debt over to yet another 0% card, potentially, but I still think it's important for you to understand sort of the worst case scenario. If you can't transfer that debt, what kind of interest rate will you be paying, and to factor that into your decision as to whether a balance transfer option is right for you in the first place. Okay, tip number 5, and this is one of the 2 traps that I mentioned when I opened the podcast, and that is you got to be aware of the balance transfer fee. Virtually all 0% balance transfer cards have a fee. The industry standard is 3%. So if you were to transfer, for every $100 you were to transfer to the new card, you'd pay a $3 fee. And you pay that up front, and what they do is add that to your balance. So when you do this transfer, your total debt will go up by the amount of the transfer fee. Now, usually, even with a transfer fee, it's still a really good deal because, you might be paying 10, 15, 20% in interest on your credit card debt, and to get it transferred to 0% in exchange for a 3% transfer fee is still a really good deal. But you want to make sure you understand what the transfer fee is. I have seen some as high as 4 or 5, even 6%. Again, the industry standard is 3%, and that's really what you should look for. Occasionally, you will find a no-fee 0% balance transfer. Those are generally rare. They used to be more common than they are today. The vast majority of offers charge 3%. But again, make sure you're aware of that, how it's going to affect your total debt, and be sure that the credit card company isn't charging more than that. Okay, tip number 6, and this is the second trap, and this is one that a lot of people don't realize. When you do a balance transfer, your minimum payment may actually go up. I've seen and I've dug into the terms and conditions of credit card agreements, and it's not unusual for a credit card issuer to have a different calculation for minimum payments when it comes to 0% balance transfers. They're giving you this money for no interest, so they want it back as quickly as possible. And so they can oftentimes increase the minimum payment that you'll have to make on debt that you've transferred at 0% onto the card. For example, I've seen where the standard payment is 2% of the outstanding balance, but for balance transfers, it's 4%. Again, still can be a very good deal. This doesn't necessarily mean that the offer is not a good one for you, but you want to make sure you know what you're getting into and that you can handle the minimum payment. So tip number 6 is to be aware of the minimum payment on a balance transfer and to recognize that for some credit card companies, it could be a little higher than a standard minimum payment. Okay, tip number 7 deals with credit scores, and there are a couple of issues here. The first is you should know and have an understanding of the kind of score you need to qualify for the top 0% balance transfer cards. Another site that I run called allcards.com, 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 actually tracks credit scoring information by credit card. So you'll see if you go to that site and you look at some of the interest-free credit card offers, you will see the average credit score of those who got approved for the card as well as the lowest score for approval. And having looked at that data extensively as part of that site, I can tell you that generally for the best 0% transfer cards, you are looking at credit scores in the low 700s as an average. That's the average approved score. When you look at the lowest approved score, you do see approvals in the 600s. Obviously, credit score is just one factor that the credit card companies consider in making this decision. But that's something that you should understand. I mean, there's a lot of talk about 0% balance transfer cards. They can be great, but they're generally for folks who have credit scores around 700 or higher. Again, there are other factors like income and all that sort of thing, but that's something that you need to know up front. The second thing is related to credit scores is that, when you apply for a credit card, that is an inquiry. That is a hard pull. And if you're wondering what that is, we covered that in our last episode. So you can go to DoughRoller.net/podcast 42. That's podcast followed by the number 42, where we talk about inquiries, hard pulls and soft pulls. And when you apply for a credit card, whether it's a balance transfer card or not, it will be a hard pull on your credit, and it will have a negative effect on your credit score. Now, usually it's not a significant effect. Credit inquiries are one of the least important factors in your overall credit picture and affects your credit score the least. but it still can affect it, and it's something to keep in mind, particularly if perhaps you're looking to refinance a mortgage or buy a home in the next few months or 6 months or so, where you really you don't want to do anything to hurt your credit score. So do understand that applying for a 0% balance transfer card, like any credit card, will have an inquiry on your record, and that will bring down your score a little bit. Now, that's the bad news. There is actually a silver lining to all of this. Over time, 0% balance transfer cards actually can improve your credit score a little bit, and that may sound odd, but here's why. Imagine you have one credit card and it's maxed out at $5,000, and you get a second one for a 0% balance transfer, and you transfer that $5,000 to that new card. Well, now, where before you were maxed out completely, now you have two cards, a total of $10,000 in available credit, and you still have just the $5,000 in debt. It's switched over, right? It's switched over to the new card, but now your credit utilization is lower, and because all of the payments you're making don't have to go to any interest, all of it goes to the principal balance, you'll pay your balance down more quickly. So over time, using a 0% balance transfer can actually improve your credit utilization, and that's actually a far more important factor in your credit scores than inquiries. So over time, it can help you, and if you're scratching your head on credit utilization and all of that, I would highly recommend you check out my second podcast. That's DoughRoller.net/podcast 2. That's podcast followed by the number 2. In that podcast, I interviewed Tom Quinn. He is the credit expert at FICO. So you really couldn't find a better source of information. And one of the things Tom and I discuss in that episode is credit utilization. Actually, we also touch on inquiries. So an excellent podcast if you want to understand that. But those three things, the score you need to qualify for one of the top cards, the fact that it will be an inquiry on your credit report, but also that over time it could actually help your credit utilization, which can improve your score, I think are things to keep in mind as you make this decision and decide what's best for you. Tip number 8, ask about checks. Paper checks, that you can write and pay debt with. So here's how it works. When you apply online for a balance transfer card, they will give you an opportunity right there on the website to enter information about other credit card debt that you have. And they will even process that transfer for you, assuming that you're approved for their card. And that's very convenient, and that's great. But what if you don't want to pay another credit card? What if you want to pay a car loan or a student loan or some other kind of debt? Well, usually to do that, you need to write a check, right? Most credit card or car loan companies are not going to allow you to pay with a credit card. Same thing with a student loan. Well, a lot of the banks issuing a 0% balance transfer credit cards will send you checks and allow you to write checks to pay off your debt. Now, not all of them do, and what my experience is sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So if you're in this situation where a check would be helpful to pay off other kinds of debt besides credit cards, you'll want to check with the banks issuing the 0% balance transfer credit card. Just give them a call and find out what they offer. Tip number 9 is that typically you cannot transfer debt from one credit card to another where they're both issued by the same bank. So, for example, you wouldn't be able to transfer debt from one Chase credit card to another Chase credit card, or from one Capital One card to another. They don't allow that. So that's important to know as you start to narrow down your options. If you're trying to transfer debt that's on a Capital One credit card, then you want to look for cards with other issuers because you won't be able to transfer that debt. Okay, tip number 10 is this, and it's how to find the best deal. So right now, the longest 0% balance transfer offer that I have seen lasts for 18 months, 1.5 years. And there are a number of issuers that offer this, including Discover, Citi, Capital One. So there are a number of options. And virtually for all of them, the balance transfer fee is the same, 3%. So that's usually the best deal. Now, Chase does offer a no-fee balance transfer with the Slate card. Now, it's not for 18 months. It doesn't last that long, but it does last for 15 months, and that's a pretty good deal as well. Now, I will say for those listening, these offers do change pretty regularly, and so I will leave a link in the show notes to a page on DoughRoller where you can check out the latest offers That gets updated actually automatically daily as rates and terms change. So you may be listening to this, a month, 6 months, maybe even a year or two from now. But that page will be updated and you can find the best offers. But finding the best deal is important. If you can qualify for 0% for 18 months, but end up settling for, say, a 12-month card because you didn't know what the other offers were, you're really cutting it short. You're not getting the best deal for your situation. And the longest 0% offer you can get is usually the best for, I think, obvious reasons. Allows you to continue to pay off your debt for a longer period of time without incurring any interest charges. It also, if you're going to roll over to another balance transfer card, it just extends further the time that you'll have to do that and then pay another perhaps 3% transfer fee. So that's usually what you look for in finding the best deals, the length of the offer and the transfer fee. As I said, I'll leave a link in the show notes to help you find the best deal. And that's it for balance transfer cards. They can be a great way to get out of debt quickly. I certainly used them in our situation. They were very helpful. You just have to use them responsibly and make sure you understand the terms and conditions of the cards that you end up choosing for your situation. So with that, a quick money tip of the day, and it actually comes back to my scheduling of a trip for my wife and I. We were looking for flights, and when you're looking for flights, maybe you go to your favorite airline. Perhaps you go to like a Expedia or Priceline or some site like that. What I found to be one of the best sites to find cheap flights is Google. If you go to Google and you simply type in flights, and there may be a faster way to get to this, I don't know, but it's how I do it. If you go to Google and you just search for the word flights, it'll bring up a box, and for us it shows that we're located here in the Washington, D.C. area. A little box, you just type in where you want to go, and it will immediately bring up various airlines and the costs and the times. You can select the date of departure and the return. I found it to be very, very easy to use. And once you find the flight you want, it gives you a link that directs you over to that airline where you can book the trip. So that's my money tip of the day. I found it to be very easy to use and a great way to find the best rate. So I hope that helps you. And as always, shoot me an email, dr@DoughRoller.net. I read and respond to every single email. If you want to listen to old episodes of this podcast, just go to DoughRoller.net/iTunes. That will redirect you to the iTunes page, and you can subscribe to the podcast there as well. And finally, you can get the show notes to this episode, including links to all the relevant resources that I've mentioned. Just go to DoughRoller.net/podcast 44. That's podcast followed by the number 44. And again, if you have any questions at all about 0% balance transfer, credit cards, how they work, tips, tricks, whatever, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email at dr@DoughRoller.net. So until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.